Hogan Assessments just dropped research that proves what we've all suspected. The people getting promoted into leadership and the people employees want to work for, two completely different set of traits. Imagine that. Download their free global report at hogan.to/I hate it here. This is The Leadership Divide, a special podcast series of Hogan Assessments in partnership with I Hate It Here. I'm Hiba Yusuf, and we're on episode 2 of 4. Last episode, Allison and I set the table, why leadership is at a breaking point and why the old criteria for picking leaders doesn't honestly hold up. This episode, we get into the messy part, the dark side. And not me ready to make a Star Wars themed joke right now about the dark side. I will not go there. I will not go full nerd just yet. There are 11 patterns of behavior, according to Hogan's research, and that quietly erode a team from the inside. And the cursed part is they don't usually show up in the interview. They don't show up in the first 90 days. They usually show up after someone already has the title, the team, and the power. If you've ever watched a perfectly lovely coworker turn into a nightmare the second they got promoted, this episode is for you. To unpack it, I'm joined by Jocelyn Hays. Jocelyn has more than 15 years of experience designing and implementing talent assessment tools across the entire employee lifecycle, from selection and onboarding to leadership development and succession planning. As director of Hogan Applications, she builds the interactive personality assessment solutions and platforms behind them. She studies the stuff that goes bump in the night at work, basically. So let's get into it. Jocelyn, welcome to the pod.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I cannot wait to talk more about the dark side of leadership because you had me take the Hogan assessment, and I'm hopeful that on this episode we can maybe talk about the dark side of my leadership. I don't know. I'm very vulnerable on this podcast all the time, talking about the things I do badly and the behaviors that I'm very aware of. So I can't wait to unpack that more with you. But let's start first with the definition. When Hogan talks about the dark side of personalities, what does that actually mean? And just as important, what does it not mean? Because I don't want anyone thinking we're calling their boss like a villain.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So first, thank you so much for taking the assessments. It's always a treat for me to look at someone's results and then kind of get to talk with them. But also specifically for this episode, it's really helpful to get a little sneak peek into your derailers. That way you and I can kind of talk about it. And I too will be fully transparent about my own derailers. So what we call the dark side of personality at Hogan really refers to these 11 characteristics that research indicates will negatively impact a leader's effectiveness and then therefore a team's effectiveness if they are not managed and monitored, right? And it's a tricky thing about derailers because so we have an assessment that measures derailers, the Hogan Development Survey. Mm-hmm. And if you look at our data on that assessment, and millions of people have taken the HDS over the 3 decades that it has existed, if you look at the data on that assessment, almost everybody has some high risk or moderate risk derailers. So it's not like you could go out and find somebody and say, oh, you have the secret, you don't derail. Most people will have these natural innate characteristics that when, they are under stress or they are bored or they start to feel insecure will really be triggered and become counterproductive, kind of rear their ugly heads a little bit in those difficult times.
Do you want to talk about my derailers? Should we tell people what mine were?
Do you? Well, let's get into the next question a little bit first. Yeah. And then I'll have you guess what your derailers were.
Oh God, I'm so nervous. Okay, so there are 11 derailing patterns. Give us the lay of the land broadly. What kind of behaviors are we talking about?
Yeah, so this is one thing that's really interesting with the Hogan Development Survey and the derailers that we manage. So there are 11 characteristics, and each of them have specific behavioral and reputational risks, but they also cluster. So when we look at how people respond to stress, it kind of falls into 3 broad categories. Okay. Some people respond to stress, insecurity, discomfort by what we call moving away. They are moving away derailers. When the going gets tough, people with these derailers get going. They go to another room, they go to another situation, they go to another team. They want to disengage, to move away from the problem. The second type of kind of derailing characteristics, the second category, are what we call moving against derailers. So, where you can think about moving away as kind of the need for flight, moving against is the need for fight. People who are high on our moving against derailers, when they are triggered, they want to lean in. They want to engage more, talk more, ideate more, move more in order to kind of dominate, to control, to influence the situation at hand. And then the third category we call moving towards. Moving towards is really about alignment. So here we see people will either try to align themselves with some objective standard of what is, right or good. They'll become overly perfectionistic, overly detail oriented, or they will want to align themselves with a subjective standard, what other people say is right or good. So they'll become overly consensus seeking to the point of ingratiating. And what can happen with any of these derailers, the risk here is both a performance risk. So if you're overly consensus seeking, and I'm high on our dutiful derailer, not only can that slow down my decisions because I'm going around seeking information before making a decision, but also if I go to my boss and ask every time I have to make a critical decision what he thinks, eventually he's going to say, you're driving me a little bit crazy, right? Go and take action and own your stuff. And so there is both this performance risk to derailers, but probably even more so, there's a relationship and reputation risk when your derailers come out and you don't manage them. So of those three categories, moving away, moving against, and moving toward, where do you think most of your derailers showed up?
I think it has to be moving against.
Why do you say that? When you have been stressed in the past, when you're under pressure, what do you want to do?
I want to lean in further. And I literally wrote, so I was taking notes while you were talking. I wrote under moving away, not I, exclamation point. Under moving against, I wrote fight, exclamation point. Move towards things, arrow, me. And then I thought, I think I move, probably I think moving against would be me. I have been known to dig my heels in, lean in, really try to ideate. And I do feel like I get triggered by that type of stuff.
Well, congratulations on your self-awareness, because you're 100% right. When I looked at your Hogan Development Survey results, there is a strong tendency to want to lean in, to want to take action, make moves. I would encourage you to think about the triggers too, right? Derailers don't come up on an everyday basis. You might be triggered by stress. You might also get triggered by boredom or bureaucracy, or when people want to slow down. Your immediate reaction to that might be to want to push a little and say, no, there's no need to slow down here. We go fast. You might prefer errors of action to errors of inaction. So you might say, let's take a chance. And if it fails, it fails. It's better than taking no chance at all. How do you react to that?
All spot on. Genuinely, like I sent my direct report, just your readout of me. And I said, do you think this is aligned? She's been working with me for 4 years. I said, do you think this is aligned with how you've worked with me for 4 years now? She very knows me as a boss, as a friend, like knows me pretty well. And she was like, this is scarily spot on, like the most spot on of any assessment results you've ever sent me about yourself. And I think it's true. Like my other best friend has a funny quote in reference to me where she often says, I have a delusional relationship with authority, meaning like, I just like don't do well with authority figures or rules or people telling me what to do. And I tend to want to ask why and lean in more and fight it. And so when I was taking the assessment and reading when you were explaining derailers to me and showing me where it was in my results, I was like, oh, all of these things that my very close friends know about me, it's also showing up here. And it's interesting because it talks a lot about who I am at work. But my friends read it and were like, that we hear your frustrations about work. All of this is pretty spot on.
Yeah. So this is part of the magic of Hogan. The way that we developed our assessments was we developed our assessments so that when you answer the items, we don't look at that and say, what are you saying about yourself? what we do is we look at it and say, with all of our research, if somebody answers the items like this, what do other people say about them? And so it is really common for not only your coworkers and your boss, but also your family and your friends to kind of see accuracy in your Hogan results. And I think that's particularly true with derailers, with the HDS. Because the thing about derailers is when you're at work, you want to manage them, right? If you have some level of self-awareness, you're going to say, I don't want to show up as a nightmare at work. When you're at home, when you're with your friends, when you're with your partner or your family, you might not feel so compelled to manage some of those tendencies, right? You might feel much more comfortable letting your hair down, letting your true colors show.
Yeah. It's truly fascinating. One of the reports also said, like, I scored very high on like no social anxiety. And my friends found that hysterical because they were like, that is so true. You genuinely, like, you could be dropped in any situation and you would leave the situation with a new friend, someone's like secret details, or like you would learn about someone's childhood trauma. Like, we don't know how you do it, but you're always talking to people and you're always getting like no social anxiety. And I'm like, I don't know. I love that the test picked up on that, because some of the questions, when I tell you, I was like, I don't know. Like, I would pick an answer and then be like, did I read that right? I feel like I strongly, and I had a hard time saying. It was so funny because I was like monitoring myself while taking the assessment, and it was interesting to see how quickly I would pick agree versus how quickly I would pick strongly agree. And that was like also like an interesting psychological situation for myself.
Well, and it is, and you'll see this even in your own results. Sometimes you'll have scores that are, so all of our assessments are scored in percentiles, right? So it's 0 to 100. Sometimes you'll have scores that are in the 60s or the 50s, 60s. And those are the places where you're a little more nuanced, right? It kind of depends a little bit more on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
More extreme scores, those are the things where you see the question and you're like, yes, I strongly agree. And I'll give you a good example of this. So with derailers, we almost always look at high scores. That's where we look for risk first. But we also can look at extreme low scores and kind of say, what's the opposite risk on the low end? On our dutiful derailer, so dutiful is deference to authority. People who are high dutiful on a good day seem loyal and willing to follow others. On a bad day, they become ingratiating, they become indecisive, right? That's high dutiful. So when I have to make a critical decision, I'm over 90 on dutiful. When I have to make a critical decision, I immediately want to go talk to other people, including my boss and any kind of stakeholders or authority figures. You are a 4 on dutiful, which means that compared to a large stratified norm of working adults around the world, only 4% of people care as little or less than you do about what figures of authority think of you. And look, it's not to say that you're going to go out and be like a criminal or some kind of, rebel. This is all within normal human personality and human behavior. But I think it is at those extreme ends of characteristics where people can look at it and say, yes, you have a delusional relationship with authority, right? Not just sometimes. It's not that sometimes you don't need authority. And look, I mean, and again, right, I've been doing this for many, many years. So when I looked at your derailers, was I surprised? No, not at all. Because you're a podcast host. You have to put yourself out there as a figure of authority on a topic. You have to be comfortable with visibility. You have to be comfortable being recognized, and you have to be comfortable with people disagreeing with you. You might put out a podcast episode and somebody might comment on it and say, I didn't like this or I disagree. You have to be able to sleep at night. That 4 on dutiful is going to help you a lot more in that situation than, in my 96, right? I got on the studio and was immediately like, what audio device should I use? Can I do anything better? So if somebody put a negative comment on me, I would be like, oh no. So it really is looking at, in your context, is this a strength or is this a derailer? In your context, the moving against derailers are probably a much better fit than what moving away or moving towards would be, right? Those would be the bigger risks.
Yeah. I need to spend more time reading my assessment results, because when I read them at first, I was like absolutely spot on. And sometimes I I don't know. I sometimes work like I think I'm very self-aware. So like one of the other things that it called out was that I have a very big personality and I have to be mindful
Mhm.
in rooms to not overshadow everybody. And I promise you, I've been actively working on that since 2010 when my best friend told me one time, like your mood sets the mood for an entire party that we're at. Like
Yes.
I don't think you realize how your mood impacts everyone else. And I carried that into my professional career, being very mindful that like when I'm in a sour mood, people can tell. And it tends to
Mhm.
impact the whole room. And I thought like in the assessment it said that too. And I was like, oh wow, I felt really good about myself in the moment because I was like, wow, I've been so self-aware of this since for so many decades at this point that like, yes, I'm glad I know this, but it also just highlighted so much growth that I've done personally too. I thought
Mhm.
that was interesting. We always think of like assessments try to tell you who you are, but I think for me when I read it, I was like, it actually showed me a lot about how far I've come and like how I can better show up again still today. Like one of my previous roles when I was in the interview process, I told them throughout the interview process, like, here are my bad traits. They were like, whoa, why are you bringing this up? We didn't ask you about this. And I was like, I think it's helpful for me to tell you these things to see if they would work okay with you. And in the end, they were like, wow, that was really helpful for us. But I think that's something that not a lot of people do, especially in a really tough job market like today. This was years ago because I think like a lot of these traits often stay hidden, even when we're in a hiring process and they only really come up after someone takes a role. Like, why do you think that happens? Whereas, like, I approached it as being very self aware about my dark spots. Why do you think sometimes these things definitely stay hidden in hiring and absolutely come out after someone has the role?
I think there's a few answers to this. I mean, one of them is so first, every derailer has a positive element, right? You summed it up beautifully. When you look at your assessment results, there is a strong theme around social energy. And so people might find you approachable, friendly. You might always be willing to get out there and talk and be the center of attention. That's very comfortable, right? You might find that you're pretty influential, that if you want people to kind of go along with a plan, that you're really able to talk to them, get them hyped up about it, get them moving, in your direction. Where that becomes a derailer, where that coin flips is when you stop managing that and suddenly you're talking too much, right? Or you're in a context where you're working with really reserved people and you assume that they're going to give input and you forget that you have to really stop and ask them and get quiet, right? Even though that's not your tendency. So I think that in the interview process in the early days, what you're likely to see are more of those positive elements, right? And I mean, what's the one piece of advice, number one piece of advice that somebody tells you when you go into an interview?
What is it? I don't know. I feel like my piece of advice would be different. Show up as your best self. Be the
Okay.
best version
Yes.
of yourself.
Yes. Put your best foot forward. Show up as your best. So most people, I mean, and I applaud you because I do think it's really important that we all just get on board with the idea that everyone has derailers. Everyone has things that they want to grow and develop and think about and be conscious of when they're, working on a day-to-day basis. I think we should all get more honest and open about that. But up to now, when you get advice on going into an interview, it's show up as your best self. And so I think when you're in that setting and even in the early, days of your employment, you're just always very conscious of that. You're always thinking about how am I showing up? How am I behaving according to, what is expected of me? And I think too, there's this great episode of the Office where the American version of the Office where Michael Scott's being interviewed for a promotion I think it's a promotion. And the interviewer says, "Tell me about your greatest strength." And he says, "Let me tell you about my greatest weakness. I care too much and I work too hard." Right? And so when people are in the early days, they are really working to say even these things that are not great about me are kind of great about me. But over time, number one, the pressure is going to build, right? Not everything is going to be the honeymoon phase. You're going to start having bad days. You're going to start having tough problems. You're going to start having interpersonal conflict. That's unavoidable at work. Number two, you just grow more complacent. You stop worrying so much about how people are seeing you. and how they're experiencing you, and you kind of start to let those true colors show more. And so I think that it's a combination of the context. When you're early in the role, you are not likely to face maybe as much stress, as many challenges as later on. And then combine that with the fact that naturally derailers tend to emerge over time as you grow more comfortable. So you kind of have this perfect storm of saying, okay, we didn't know this about you. And now we're 6 months into this relationship, and all of a sudden you're doing something that's really off-putting that we'd like you to stop doing.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, I know a lot of people wouldn't take the approach of me of being like, here are my greatest weaknesses and here's where I get bored. But I learned early on in my career, I took a job in government consulting. I frequently say it was like the most bored I'd ever been at a job because everything moved so slow. And I found myself like being so not fulfilled every day that I would find other things to do. And it was awful. And so when the later I got in my career, the more I was like, I mean, I've worked at 4 venture backed startups. Like, I clearly like the pace and the speed of a startup. And so I thought that, like, going into the interview process, if I could be honest, like, I don't do well in situations where there's a lot of bureaucracy, where there's a lot of authority, where I can't make my decisions that need to be made, where I constantly have to defer to other people's political behavior in order to get my agenda passed. Like, I did that in the interview process, and I think they were like really charmed by it. I did it again at Work Week too. Like, when I interviewed with this co-founders at Work Week, I was like, hey, you should know what I'm like, because if this will not work with you, none of us will be happy. You won't be happy with me in this role as HR. I won't be happy as HR in this role for you, and it won't work. And I laid it out on the table, and I was just very honest about who I am. And I think, like, they really appreciated that. And thankfully, we have similar working styles. So I bet you, like, my CEO's derailers are probably very similar to my derailers, because everyone says he and I tend to work very similarly. So, like, it worked. I did not have similar working styles to previous CEOs I've worked with. So I found that, like, in HR, our toughest relationship a lot of times is that one with the CEO. So, like, really understanding my derailers really helped me show up better as an HR leader, and then also gave me a critical lens to think about my CEO's derailers, which are like mine, basically. And a lot of these, like, kind of dark side behaviors usually get painted as strengths at first, like, ooh, confidence, attention to detail, charm. Like, at what point do these strengths actually tip into, like, the derailer category?
Yeah, I think that if you can think about derailers as being triggered, and I thank you so much for sharing that story about interviewing, because again, having seen your personality results, I don't none of that surprises me. You have both a high natural level of confidence and optimism, according to how you responded to our assessments. You also have a very low level of risk aversion. So when you responded to the assessments, the way that you responded indicates that other people are going to describe you as very confident, outgoing, optimistic, focused on opportunities, not potential problems, willing to take risks. So you might walk into an interview and think to yourself, I can be totally honest here, because if I'm totally honest and they say no, I'm okay with that risk. I'll go find something else. And I have the confidence that I can find something else, right? And that all those things show up in your derailers, that confidence, that social energy, that willingness to take risks. It is all there, and it's all there every day. It's just a part of who you are, right? On a good day, it shows up in that interview style and finding a good fit, with Work Week where you are now. On a bad day, what happens is, in many cases, what happens is you just end up overusing that same strength. So on a good day, you are confident, you are assertive, you are willing to take a risk. On a bad day, maybe you're sitting in a meeting that's been going on forever and you're not getting anywhere, and you start to feel very frustrated. Your natural reaction to that might be to throw something out that's really innovative, really risky, really provocative, to see how people react to it, right? To get people reacting. Oh, you look like I'm right. Am I right? Have you done that before?
Oh God, yes, I have. So has my CEO, actually. He and I tend to both do that, so I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah.
Oof.
So it's the same thing, right? I mean, everything has pros and cons. Every characteristic. I love what I do because I love people. I love them for the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And if you look at any given characteristic or quality in a person, you will find that there is a pro to it and then there is a con to it. It is two sides of the same coin, right? If you look at my results, I'm incredibly passionate. I get really enthusiastic and that's great. But when things start to go wrong, I get upset. I get really irritated. I start to yell. It's the same thing. The same passion that makes me loudly joyful also makes me loudly frustrated when I don't manage it, when I let it, get out of control. And forgive me, I'm such a TV and movie buff. But the way I always
Same.
explain this, oh good. The way I always explain this is the movie Jaws. We all know the sharks are in the water, right? The sharks are an important part of the ecosystem. They're in the water. It's not until the shark comes up out of the water that everybody's like, oh, you're going to need a bigger boat to deal with this shark, right? So your confidence is in the water on an everyday basis. You're leading with confidence, assertiveness, optimism. That's great. But all of a sudden it's a bad day and you start pushing and your team starts feeling like, oh, we need to slow down. We need to take less risk, be more cautious. You might not feel that way. You want to go, you want to be the shark that comes up out of the water and your team saying, hey, our boat can't handle that.
Okay, I need to talk about this real quick because it absolutely sent me. Hogan Assessments compared personality data from over 21,000 executives against what nearly 10,000 employees across 25 different markets want from a leader. When they looked at the top 5 competencies of current executives versus the top 5 competencies employees are begging for, guess what they found? That there's zero overlap. I wish I was joking. Hogan has the world's largest database of personality research, and they used it to create a free global report called The Leadership Divide. It quantifies the gap so you can finally stop explaining it in every skip level you've ever had. Download it at hogan.to/I hate it here. On the note of a bad day, like stress seems to be the thing that seems to accelerate these these derailers, like manifesting the dark side of the leadership trait. Like why stress and like what happens to the leader when they're under this like real pressure, and why do we tend to default to this like kind of derailer behavior?
Yeah. I think this is so interesting. I think, whenever I coach people around their derailers, one of the first things I advise them to do is figure out when this is happening. What is it that is triggering this behavior? Because we know that they're triggered. The most common trigger is stress. So, it's a heavy workload, it's a deadline, it's something critical, it's something ambiguous, whatever it is that makes the situation high pressure. I think the reason that you're more likely to derail in those situations is twofold. Number one, it's totally natural when you're in a bad situation to just want to get out of it. So I think when people
For sure.
Yeah. I think when people are under stress, they stop worrying about the impression they're making on other people. They stop worrying about the long-term efficacy of their behavior. They just want to deal with the situation in front of them. So you kind of, derailers emerge when we stop self-monitoring, when we stop managing our impression and our behavior. When you're under stress, I think you just forget to self-monitor. Honestly, I think that's not very, technical or scientific, but I think you might just forget to worry about how other people are experiencing you. The other thing that I think is tricky about derailers is that if you really dig in with a person why they engage in this derailing behavior, you will often find that there is something about it that is very productive and comforting for the person, right? So you're in a meeting and nobody is moving forward and everybody is, this is an hour of your life that you're never going to get back. You say something really innovative and suddenly everybody's back to life and now we're moving forward. For you, you're relieving that boredom. You're relieving that frustration, right? But for other people, they might say, oh, we really didn't want to go off topic. We really didn't want to get into that. And so that's what I think it is. I think it's both that when you're in a stressful situation, you don't have the emotional and cognitive capacity as much as you do on a good day to be really monitoring your behavior, thinking about your derailers. And then I think that there is something that
Yeah.
is oftentimes comforting to the leader, him or herself, that is off-putting to others. And this is another thing that I talk about a lot with leaders is this idea of intent versus impact. So if you look at the data that's out there, Gallup and McKinsey and all these organizations, they go out and run surveys all the time. And the data largely says that leaders are failing, right? People find their bosses stressful. If you Google my boss is, the things that Google auto fills in are terrible. It's like my boss is lazy, my boss is toxic, my boss is mean to me. I don't think that leaders get up every day and go to work and think, I'm going to be the most stressful part of somebody's day, right? I think a leader who is, I'm a high, colorful leader. When I'm under stress, I get a little dramatic. I want people to know that it's a big deal, right? And so I go out there thinking when I raise my voice and I move my hands and I use, terminology like my work has come to a screeching halt, that's getting my point across. That's making an impact. But other people are feeling like, no, you're just being a drama queen, right? You're putting too much emotion into this situation. So what is simultaneously productive and comforting and meaningful to me is off-putting and uncomfortable to the people around me.
It's so interesting because I think I do well in high stress environments. And I've been like really trying to figure out. I mean, like for venture back startups, I seem to do well. Everyone's always like, you never seem stressed. You're doing like an incredible amount of work. Why do you never seem stressed? And so I'm trying to think about if stress isn't my accelerant, what is mine? And I genuinely think mine might actually be like boredom when
Yep.
things feel like they're rinse and repeat the same thing over and over again. I think that's when I catch myself starting to like slowly self sabotage or like derail things because I'm like, oh no, like a habit, consistency, that's not good. That means I'm not innovating. That means I'm not developing. That means I'm not evolving. And so I think like stress seems to accelerate. It seems to be the accelerant for a lot of people. I actually think personally for me, it's like boredom or when things become routine, I'm quick to derail.
Yes, that is, we are not talking about values on this pod, but or in this episode, but you took our values assessment. And one of the things that I will say about derailers is that a lot of times the bottom line trigger is a violation of our values. So it feels like boredom, it feels like stress, but really underneath it, it's a violation of our values. When you look at your value set, you value forward movement, you value getting things done, you value achievement. Now, there's an element of that that's tied up in helping others. There's an altruistic element that makes total sense, right? You're in HR. This is your bread and butter. There's an element of that that's really about valuing innovation. You might find that you want to move forward to the new, the novel, and not just move forward to kind of somewhere we've been before, not just circle around. And so I think that what you might find is when that value is violated, when you're bored and when nobody is getting things done and when everybody's focused on the tried and true and how we used to do things, or what if this isn't the way we did it in the past, that might be so triggering to you that you feel the need to react in this big way. And then that's the derailer. The big reaction is the derailer.
Oh my God, this feels like therapy, but it, it feels nice to like, I think I'm self-aware, but then it feels nice as you and I are talking through this, where I actually do believe I am self-aware. And I think it took, I talk about this quite frequently on the pod. I think it took like a lot of work on myself. I was kind of one of those weird kids who always asked myself like, who am I and where's my place in this world? And I don't know why I did stuff like that, probably because I'm the youngest of four and I was constantly trying to find my way in my own family of like who I was and what role I was playing in my own family, that it's been like a defining characteristic throughout my entire life of like really trying to understand who I am and what I'm doing. But these assessments also really help me because it instills confidence that I think I am on the right path, that I think I feel like set in who I am and proud of who I am. And even reading the Derailers, which like aren't nice. Like some of them are like, yeah, you sabotage things when you're bored. Like even reading those, I still was like, okay, I still am who I am. I don't know. There's I think it's an E. E. Cummings quote from one of his poems about in a world that tells you night and day, like who to be, to like be yourself is the greatest thing you can do. I butchered that quote, anyone listening, but there is a quote from poetry about just like being happy with who you are. And I think the assessment like kind of really helped me there because I feel it every day, but then seeing it and also how I'm answering the questions and the science behind it was really fascinating. So I feel like this is like a therapy session for me. But to bring it back to HR, because HR people do listen to this podcast, and how can this help them other than being on their quest of like self-awareness? Like if these derailers could truly really like rock an environment, think about like at a startup, like we're 65 people, we're going to grow more, but like imagine your startup is 20 people or 10 people. Every single person you add to the organization is your culture evolving in a really interesting way. Now imagine you hire someone whose derailers completely throw your organization into chaos. Like if I can't catch these behaviors in an interview, how do you think I can spot them before it really causes a negative impact to my organization?
Well, I think that you can look at them in selection. So we do, the Hogan Development Survey or the HDS, that assessment is used in as selection, heavily, particularly executive selection. Everybody has derailers, but of course for a leader, because they have a bigger scope of influence and impact, derailers are more risky, more critical. So I think you can look at it in selection. And the way that we often do that is we'll have people take the assessment so that we kind of know where your risks might be. And then in an interview, you try to tap into the level of awareness around that risk and how they have adapted in the past to mitigate the risk, right? So with your interview results, very action oriented, pretty risk tolerant, I might ask you a question like, tell me about a time when you made a fast decision and it did not go well. Looking back, what would you have done differently? And what I would be looking for is this recognition of sometimes I move too fast. Sometimes I take a big risk and it doesn't pay off. And here's what I do to either make up for that or learn from that. And then I think beyond selection, I do think, and I know it sounds probably a little Pollyanna, but I do think that there is a need in our just work culture to be more honest about the fact that we are not just human beings at home, we are human beings at work. We don't come to work and become these machines that can be programmed to operate in certain ways. No matter how hard we try to be our best, we are going to falter, we are going to fall, we are going to derail. So once someone is on the job, I think then you do some coaching, make them aware of their derailers. Some people and a lot of leaders will know this stuff about themselves, right? And then you talk about what does that mean in this context? Because that's the other piece of this. I mean, personality does not change. There's never going to be a day that I wake up and say, I don't care what people think about me anymore. I'm naturally a people pleasing person, right? So if I went into a context, I remember when I was in high school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, like a litigator. And I would be like, Ally McBeal style, I would be the worst lawyer in the world. If a judge was like, no, I don't like that. You're guilty. Your client is guilty. I mean, I would cry. Right. And so I think that's the other piece of it is recognizing what is our context? How risky are these derailers in this context? And how can you manage them? Right. It's that combination of personality and context. I hate the question, what is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? I think the question should be, who are you? When are those things naturally a strength? And in what context are those things going to need to be adapted or covered up a little bit or compensated for? I think that's the better way to come at that idea of how can we use this person's talent to our best benefit in our organization, to the team's best benefit, to their best benefit.
I would love to be a lawyer. I think I'd have so much fun.
Not knowing you at all, but having seen your personality profile, I think that you have both the charm and the necessary toughness to be a lawyer. I don't doubt it.
I would genuinely be like, Your Honor, what do you mean? You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you
Exactly.
mean? I'm objecting. What do
Like,
you
I
mean
know.
you're not following through on why I'm objecting to this? Like,
Yeah,
I would be arguing with the judge and he would be like, you're in contempt. You're out. Like, we're kicking you out of this court.
it's
It'd be a
like
fun
that
time.
scene in Clueless where the gal gives her report card to her
Yes.
father and he says a C. And she said, that's just an opening point for negotiation, right? And she negotiated with her teachers to get an A.
Cher definitely became a lawyer like her dad after.
Exactly.
I know we didn't get that in the movie, but she definitely became a lawyer because I was like, that's so smart. You should negotiate your grades.
Yes.
Like, just like I tell people all the time, like your performance reviews are also a negotiation, your severance agreement also a negotiation. And people are like, what in the world are you talking about? I'm like, everything in this world. That's why my friend said I have a delusional relationship with authority. I was trying to negotiate politely with like the TSA equivalent in an airport in London about the amount of liquids I should be able to bring. And the
Hmm.
man was like, it fits in this bag. If it does not fit in this bag, you are throwing it away. And I was like, no, but like, I need this.
Yes.
And he was
You're
like,
like, let me
I
find the
don't,
gray area in this rule.
he
Where
was
is
like,
the loophole?
I don't care. It goes in the bag or you're not clearing security.
Yep.
I tried to be very clear. Like it's a rules thing. I just don't believe in them. But I think like that the question, what's your greatest strength, greatest weakness? I haven't asked that in forever, and I don't think I ever would. And I like the way you framed it too, because it is interesting to see how people answer these questions in an interview and like what we're actually screening for. Like the thing I try to get closer and closer for is like we need to be screening for the behaviors. It's like, yes, people need to have tangible skills, but like do their behaviors align and work well with our
Yes.
environment? Because like we are not an environment that would work well for somebody if they constantly need answers given to them rather than seeking them out. So I think like those types of things are fascinating. Do you believe these patterns can actually be managed and developed, or are we just like screening out people who might not fit in our environment?
I think they can be managed and developed, and I think they have to be. I mean, we have done so much research on leaders over the years. We have so much data into leader personality and performance metrics, and leader performance metrics are always flawed. But one of the things that we have found definitively, and I think most leadership research at this point would agree, is that there is just no one ideal leader. You're never going to find a perfect candidate. Again, you're never going to find somebody who is not a human being at work when get them into work. And so I do think that developing it has to be part of it. I think it's a fairly easy formula, honestly. Make people aware of the derailers and remember that positive element, because this is another tricky thing. Take yourself, for instance, right? I bet when you were early in career, people loved your confidence. They loved your risk taking. You are charming. You are a go getter, right? As they say in The Office, or the movie Office Space, the guy says he's a straight shooter with upper management potential written all over him. So when people are young in career, we really reward these things. And then they get to a leadership level and we say, hey, all that confidence, your peers don't really love that. It's feeling a little pushy. So could you tone that down a little, right? So that's the other thing about derailers. Like they'll get you to a certain point and then all of a sudden you need to manage them. And so I think the first step is helping people be aware of what is the strength here? How is it a derailer? I think anytime you're talking about derailers, you have to talk about triggers. I think it's very astute that you recognize that for you, it's boredom. For a lot of people, it's stress. It could be boredom, insecurity, again, just complacency. My high colorful comes out the worst when I go to our headquarter office in Tulsa. I'm so excited to see everybody. I'm so comfortable. I've been with Hogan for 14 years that I will just get silly in the office, just silly. And I get loud. I got to tone it down. And so I think that's step 2. You got to recognize the trigger. And then step 3 is figure out some small concrete changes in behavior that you can make, right? I cannot say I had a boss that did not care for my dutiful behavior. And so we made a rule that if I chat you and I want your advice on Teams, you don't have to respond to me. If I email you and I want your advice, you don't have to respond to me. But if I text you, know that this situation is bad enough that I need your help, right? And that gave us both a way to manage my dutiful derailer. I'm not going to just stop going to my boss. That's too big of a change. That's too far against my natural grain. but I can make small changes to mitigate that risk, right? You might find that if somebody said to you, hey, you have got to slow down, you might say, one thing I can do is go to a trusted confidant and say, hey, I can see all the opportunity here. You tell me where you see risk. That's using your strength of socializing, communicating, recognizing opportunities. Go find somebody whose strength is recognizing potential problems and ask them.
I love that. The self-awareness of leaders seems to be like at an all-time low. And like I'm thinking about, like, as you're saying, like, make people aware of their derailers and their triggers. Like, there's nothing scarier than telling someone how they're negatively impacting everyone else. And I'm someone who does not get scared very easily. I'm sure that showed up in the assessments. Like, I don't get scared to be direct and be honest. And even I still take a pause before telling someone that, because it hits at their like deepest ego part, which is why I love like having the science of an assessment behind it. Cause then I'm not like, hey, you're derailing every conversation in this way. It's like a neutral third party is saying it. And then I can come in as HR and be like, so what did you think of that? Like, what did you learn about your derailers? And then I can work with them on it, because I do think it's like kind of terrifying to tell
Oh, yeah.
somebody you're
I'm
kind
such
of ruining the vibes.
a chicken. I never want to give people bad news. So when I coach around derailers, and I'm in product. I do not,
Yeah.
the coaches that work with Hogan that are true coaches are much, much better at it than I am. But one of the things I'll do is I'll say, it looks like you have this derailer. Here's the element of strength. There's this really positive part. Tell me, has it gotten you into trouble? Like, when have things gone wrong? And I mean, in some ways, it is getting me out of the hot seat, right? But also, if you ask people that question, a lot of times they can think back and say, oh, yeah, there was this time, even if it's not work, right? Even if it's, yeah, there was this time that I went, on a girls' trip and I made an entire itinerary and some people felt a little stifled, right? Or there was this time that my family took a vacation and our flights got canceled and I yelled at the kids and I wish I hadn't done that. You know what I mean? So a lot of times, if you just say to people, think of a time that this characteristic, which has this great side to it, actually got you into trouble. Tell me what the situation was. Tell me what your actions were. Tell me what the results were, right? The old CAR, context, action, results. And then we can look at what small changes could you make in that situation to harness the strength, but stay away from that derailer.
I love that. You're a good negotiator. I think you'd be great in tough situations,
You know what?
honestly.
You never know. I might go back to law school. It's never too late.
It's
So you
never
never
exactly. There's always a chance to evolve your life one more time. Every
exactly.
single day. I'm a never ending Pokemon evolution. So our next episode, we're going to talk about like performance and potential. And I think I want to like do a little cliffhanger here and ask you like what you think before we get to that episode. But if these traits sometimes don't surface until someone's promoted, like, right, like we've all had that coworker that's like so great, then they get promoted and you're like, whoa, it is night and day, like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. If some of these traits don't surface until after someone's promoted, and my big question here is like, how did that person get promoted in the first place? Like, what does it tell us about how we're picking people to be leaders? Because this whole series is about the different parts of leadership and what we can learn. Like, what do you think that tells us about how we promote people?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think that number one, and you kind of alluded to this in your introduction, a lot of times we take somebody who's very good at doing a job and we're like, you're so good at doing that job, you should go lead people who do that job. Even though we have no idea if they would
Want
be a
that?
good people leader or if they even want that. Like, do we even ask people if they want to manage people before we make them manage people, So I do think that's part of it. We look at past performance, even if that performance is not in the same role or level of role, right? And then I think too, there is just we look at leadership in a flawed way. We look at when we promote, I think a lot of times we're focused more on leadership emergence. Who looks like a leader? Who is getting out there with ideas? Who is putting forth some strategies? Those are the people we promote. The people that are effective leaders are people who can empower teams, manage resources, build and maintain high performing teams. And so I think a lot of times in promotion, we're looking more at that emergence. Do you look like a leader? And less at that effectiveness. Are you going to be able to perform as a leader of a team?
I think that that might actually get me to my through line. That might Your answer might be similar to what my through line question. I'm asking everyone. I'll see all the 4 episodes. What's one thing organizations keep getting wrong about how they choose and develop their leaders, and what would it look like to actually get it right? Did I jump the gun with my question before this? What do you think? Do you have another answer?
No, I would say my advice to organizations would be look at your leaders through the eyes of their teams. Look at your leaders through
Ooh.
the eyes of the people who work for them and with them. That is your best source of information, not only about where they're going wrong, where they might derail, but also where they could be really useful, where they have some talent that you might not see looking top down, but they could really leverage, for the organization's greater benefit. So yeah, I think that we look at leaders too much from a top down, we've got this successful VP. Let's just find somebody who looks just like that and move that in. And I think that you're just shooting yourself in the foot. If you look at it from the bottom up, not only do I think you'll get better leaders, more effective leaders, I think that you will by default end up increasing your diversity in terms of men and women, ethnicity, but even background, education, expertise. Like if we think about leadership in terms of effectiveness, not who does the top think looks like a leader, but who is out there every day building and maintaining high performing teams, I think that you end up just more successful overall, right? You now have a goal. You can develop your leader toward building and maintaining high performing teams. We know there's tons of research. More engaged leaders have more engaged teams. More engaged teams have better bottom line results. So it's just kind of there's nothing but a win if we broaden our perspective on what leaders, how leaders are promoted and what they should do, in their everyday leadership lives.
I love that. I'm so sad our time here is done because I feel like I could talk to you honestly forever. For people who want to get in touch with you, want to learn more about Hogan, like what's the best way they can reach you?
info@hoganassessments.com. It's very simple. Also, jump onto our LinkedIn, our socials. This is one we've talked about derailers today, but we have all kinds of research. I know you talked about our global leadership effectiveness survey with our CEO. We put out all kinds of thought leadership. So yeah, connect with us on socials, shoot us an email, find us on the internet. And for you, I will say I am still happy to put aside some time for the two of us to fully walk through your results. I'll give you all the nuances and all the ins and outs.
I would love that because it was so fun taking the assessment. And then I was like, ha, I do know myself. Like getting the results, I was like, that is what I would do in a situation. Like it was shocking. It was shocking.
And how nice it is because you then send it to your direct report. They don't have to give you the bad news. You're like, look, I already know. You're just confirming what I already know.
She was like, spot on. This is spot on. I mean, she asked, she was like, can I take this? Can we compare our results? Like, how can I do that? So I think a lot of people would take it on their own, Jocelyn. So I can't wait for us to talk more. I get to talk with Allison again in another future episode. And this has just been such a treat. And
thank you so much. And I can't wait. The next person you're going to talk to is a woman named Jackie Som, hands down, one of the best leaders I have worked for in my career. So I'm so excited that you get to keep having these conversations.
Yay. Well, thank you so much. You're the best.
Thank you.